On the first two videos on After Virtue, we explored two ideas. First, MacIntyre's diagnosis of modern moral culture. Our debates about justice, rights, and morality often feel endless, because we no longer share the deep framework that once gave those concepts coherence. Second, we stepped back into the older moral world that preceded that collapse, a world shaped by Aristotle's idea that the human life has a telos, a purpose, and that virtues are the habits that allow us to flourish in pursuit of that purpose. But recognizing that framework raises a practical question. If modern moral discourse has become fragmented, and if the Enlightenment failed to rebuild its foundations, then how can virtue actually be recovered? MacIntyre's answer is surprisingly concrete. He does not begin with laws. He does not begin with political systems. He begins with something far closer to everyday life: the structure of human practices. MacIntyre introduces a concept that becomes central to the second half of the book: a practice. A practice is more than just an activity. It is a cooperative human endeavor aimed at achieving excellence according to standards that participants themselves gradually discover and refine. Think of activities like chess, medicine, architecture, science, music. Each of these has its own standards of achievement. To become a great chess player, you must develop strategic insight. To become a good physician, you must cultivate judgment and care. To become an excellent musician, you must discipline your craft. And inside every practice there are what MacIntyre calls internal goods. These are goods that can only be achieved by participating in the practice itself. The satisfaction of mastering a difficult piece of music, the intellectual beauty of a mathematical discovery, the elegance of a perfectly played chess game. These goods cannot simply be bought or awarded from the outside. They are realized through the pursuit of excellence within the practice, and because they require discipline, patience, and learning from others, they cultivate the virtues. But practices do not exist in isolation. They always exist within institutions, universities, hospitals, professional organizations, sports leagues. And institutions inevitably pursue external goods, things like money, prestige, status, power. These goods are not inherently bad. Institutions need resources in order to function. Hospitals require funding. Universities require administration. Sports require organization. But external goods carry a danger. They can begin to dominate the practice itself. A university may begin to care more about prestige than scholarship. A medical system may prioritize revenue over patient care. A sport may become more about celebrity than excellence, and when that happens, the practice itself begins to degrade. The standards of excellence weaken, the internal goods fade, and what remains is the pursuit of rewards. This tension between internal goods and external goods is one of the central moral pressures of modern life. And this is precisely where the virtues become necessary. Virtues such as honesty, courage, justice, and integrity are what allows individuals within practices to resist institutional corruption. Without them, practices slowly collapse into systems of reward and competition. But MacIntyre's argument goes further. Practices alone are not enough. Human life itself has a narrative structure. A life is not simply a sequence of disconnected choices. It is a story. We constantly interpret our actions within that story. We ask questions like, what kind of person am I becoming? what goals are worth pursuing, what sacrifices are meaningful. Virtues only fully make sense within this narrative context. Courage is not simply bravery in isolation. It is bravery in pursuit of something meaningful within the larger story of a life. Honesty is not just telling the truth in a single moment. It is the commitment to live a truthful life across time. Without this narrative unity, our lives become fragmented. We drift from one goal to another, from one preference to another. But when life is understood as a coherent story, virtues guide that story toward flourishing. Finally, MacIntyre expands the picture even further. Practices and individual lives exist within traditions. A tradition is not simply a collection of customs. It is an ongoing argument across generations about the human good. Traditions preserve knowledge. They transmit standards of excellence. They pass down the language through which moral questions can even be asked. And more importantly, traditions allow rational disagreement to unfold over time. This leads to one of MacIntyre's most controversial claims. He argues that rationality itself is tradition constituted. Reason does not exist in a vacuum. It develops within living traditions that carry forward debates about human flourishing. Different traditions may disagree, but within each tradition there are standards for evaluating arguments, correcting mistakes, and deepening understanding. Without those traditions, moral reasoning becomes shallow. Arguments turn into slogans, debates become endless, and moral language slowly loses its meaning. At the end of After Virtue, MacIntyre offers one of the most discussed lines in modern philosophy. He suggests that we are waiting not for a return to the past, but for another, doubtless very different, Saint Benedict. This is a reference to Benedict of Nursia. After the collapse of the Roman world, Benedict's monastic communities preserved learning, discipline, and moral practice during a time of cultural fragmentation. MacIntyre's point is not that we should imitate medieval monasteries, nor is he calling for a retreat from society. His suggestion is more subtle. When large civilizations become morally fragmented, the renewal of virtue often begins in smaller communities where practices still matter, where standards of excellence are preserved, where character is formed through shared traditions. If MacIntyre is right, the recovery of virtue will not begin with sweeping political reforms. It will begin in quieter places, in communities where practices are pursued for excellence, where lives are understood as meaningful narratives, and where traditions continue the long conversation about the human good. Modern societies have become very good at protecting freedom, but freedom alone cannot teach us what kind of people we ought to become, and perhaps the future of virtue will depend less on institutions and more on the small communities that continue to cultivate it. On another note, it wasn't until I was in the last chapter of the book that he revealed that he wasn't going to finish his argument in this book, but was making another book, and he actually wrote 2 other books, which now I'm going to have to read those. But that's okay. I enjoyed this one. I was still hoping for more solutions, but that's okay. It was enjoyable, and I hope you enjoyed the ride with me, and I hope you'll join me when I get the other books as well and do videos on those. And another thought that I had was I actually like the idea of a small community getting away from the world, and especially for the purposes of cultivating virtue. So if I ever get enough followers, maybe I'll propose that. But that's a big if. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.